now, as you listen to this, your name might be on the lips of Christ in heaven. According to Seventh-day Adventist doctrine, a divine judgment has been quietly proceeding since 1844, examining the life records of every professed believer who ever lived. Today, we're exploring the Investigative Judgment, one of the most unique and controversial doctrines in Christianity. You'll understand how this belief shapes daily spiritual life for millions, why it emerged from a 19th century prophetic disappointment, and what it means to live under constant divine scrutiny. Let me bring in someone who can walk us through this fascinating theological framework.
This doctrine is absolutely central to Adventist theology. According to the Seventh-day Adventist Encyclopedia, the investigative judgment is described as a central doctrine in their highly developed theology of judgment and eschatology. But here's what makes it so striking. It's not just about a future judgment day.
Wait, so this isn't the traditional idea of standing before God after we die?
Not at all. Adventists understand God's plan of judgment as what they call a cosmic process involving 7 distinct stages. The investigative judgment is just stage 4, the pre-Advent judgment of professed believers that began in 1844 and continues until just before Christ's return.
7 stages? That's incredibly detailed. What are we talking about here?
According to their theology, it starts with earthly judgments like the flood and Sodom in the Old Testament, then the saving judgment of the cross, then individual judgment when someone accepts or rejects the gospel. After the investigative judgment comes the execution of judgment at the second coming, then judgment of the wicked during the millennium, and finally the annihilating judgment that removes sin and death.
So this is like a cosmic legal process. But why 1844 specifically?
That's where the history gets really interesting. The doctrine emerged from what's called the Great Disappointment. William Miller had predicted Christ would return on October 22, 1844, based on his interpretation of Daniel's prophecy about 2,300 days.
And when Christ didn't return?
Instead of abandoning the date, a man named Hiram Edson claimed to have a vision the very next day, October 23, 1844. According to the page content, he was shown that they weren't wrong about the date, but about the event and location. Jesus wasn't returning to earth, but entering the most holy place of a heavenly sanctuary.
That's a pretty convenient reinterpretation. How did this develop into the full doctrine?
Well, there's actually a controversial period called the 7-year period, where this small group of disappointed Millerites taught that when Jesus left the holy place to enter the most holy place, the door of mercy was shut off to the rest of the world. Salvation was no longer possible for anyone outside their group.
That sounds pretty extreme. Did they stick with that?
No, they eventually had to reject what they called the shut door theory. Ellen White, who became their prophetess, initially supported it, but later claimed her first vision actually turned people away from it, though the historical record shows that's not accurate.
So how does the biblical interpretation work? What's their scriptural foundation?
They base it heavily on Daniel 8, 1-14, which mentions 2,300 days until the sanctuary is cleansed. Using the day-year principle, they calculate this as 2,300 years ending in 1844. They also connect it to the Old Testament Day of Atonement described in Leviticus 16.
And they see this as happening in a literal heavenly sanctuary?
Exactly. According to their interpretation, Hebrews 8:1-2 teaches that Moses' earthly sanctuary was patterned after a heavenly one. They believe Christ entered the first phase of his heavenly ministry in the holy place after his resurrection, then moved to the most holy place in 1844 to begin this investigative work.
But here's what I find fascinating. This isn't just about some distant heavenly process. How does this affect daily life for believers?
That's where it gets really personal. Ellen White taught that God judges every man according to his work. And here's the striking part. She said God sums up, day by day and hour by hour, our progress in well-doing. This is from the SDA Bible Commentary.
Hour by hour? That's incredibly intense. So believers are living under constant divine evaluation?
According to this teaching, yes. White also wrote that, we know not how soon our names may be taken onto the lips of Christ, and our cases be finally decided. There's this sense of urgency and uncertainty about when your personal judgment might occur.
That would create enormous psychological pressure. How do Adventists cope with that?
Well, they emphasize that this judgment only applies to professed believers, those who have confessed their sins and whose names are in what they call the Lamb's Book of Life. According to Ellen White's writings, only those who had come before God with confession and repentance have a part in this judgment.
So it's not about everyone, just people who've already committed to faith?
Right. The judgment of the wicked is described as a distinct and separate work that takes place later. This investigative phase is specifically about determining which professed believers will ultimately be saved.
But here's something that puzzles me. If God is omniscient, why does he need to investigate anything?
Great question. According to the Ellen White website, God doesn't need to investigate to learn who is eligible to be saved. The investigation is for the benefit of all created beings, so that everyone can see that justice has been done, and as a guarantee of the eternal stability of divine government.
So it's like a cosmic transparency initiative? Making God's decisions visible to angels and other beings?
Exactly. The doctrine portrays this as God revealing the divine evaluation of all the vast evidence of world history before angels and intelligent unfallen beings. It's described as an open, transparent investigation before full exoneration or execution takes place.
That's actually a fascinating theological concept, divine accountability to creation. But what about the practical side? How does this connect to daily spiritual practices?
This is where we see the connection to what Adventists call morning watch devotions. The page content shows they have structured daily Bible study and prayer with themes like God's love and mercy and personal victory over known sins.
So there's this rhythm of daily self-examination?
Yes, and it connects to a broader Christian tradition of self-examination. One source describes taking the interval since our last breaking of bread as the basis of the process, looking back on the past 6 days and sitting in judgment upon them.
That's interesting. So there's this parallel between divine judgment and personal reflection?
Exactly. The text talks about how we are here to look back upon them and sit in judgment upon them regarding our past days. But it also acknowledges that it is impossible at present that our days can ever be entirely what we should desire.
That seems like a healthy recognition of human limitation. But I'm curious about the critics. What do opponents say about this doctrine?
Well, there's significant criticism. One critical source describes it as a reactionary nature constructed to address the disillusionment following the Great Disappointment. Critics argue it shifts focus from the sufficiency of Christ's atoning work to an ongoing process of evaluation.
So they're saying it undermines the finality of salvation?
That's one concern. Critics worry it raises profound questions about the assurance of salvation and the finality of Christ's intercession. They see it as creating uncertainty rather than the peace that comes from knowing salvation is complete.
But supporters would argue it promotes holy living and accountability, right?
Absolutely. From the Adventist perspective, this doctrine encourages serious spiritual reflection and moral accountability. The idea that God is continuously evaluating our progress could motivate believers toward consistent spiritual growth.
And there's something to be said for the transparency aspect, this idea that God's justice will be visible to all creation.
Right. The doctrine emphasizes that the end result is that God is proved right when he judges, and his children gain new insight into his character and ways. It's about vindication of God's justice on a cosmic scale.
What strikes me is how this doctrine emerged from a specific historical crisis but has shaped an entire approach to spirituality.
That's a crucial point. What started as an explanation for why Christ didn't return in 1844 became what Ellen White called the foundation of our faith. It's described as one of the pillars of Adventist belief.
And it's created this unique rhythm of daily spiritual life, this sense of living under divine scrutiny but also divine mercy.
Exactly. The Morning Watch texts emphasize themes like mercy and faithfulness alongside accountability. There's this balance between personal victory over known sins and trust in God's love and mercy.
It's fascinating how a doctrine about cosmic judgment becomes intensely personal, this idea of hourly divine evaluation of our progress.
And that personal dimension is what makes it so psychologically powerful. Whether you see it as motivating or anxiety-producing probably depends on your spiritual temperament and how you understand God's character.
Right. For some, knowing that God is constantly aware of their spiritual progress might be comforting. For others, it could feel overwhelming.
And that tension is built into the doctrine itself. There's this urgency about not knowing when your case might be decided, but also this emphasis on God's mercy and the possibility of spiritual growth right up until the end.
What's remarkable is how this has sustained as a central belief for over 180 years, despite the criticism and the unusual historical origins.
It speaks to how deeply it resonates with certain spiritual needs, the desire for accountability, the hope for divine justice, and the comfort of knowing that God's decisions will ultimately be transparent and fair to all creation.
So when we step back from all the theological complexity, what we're really looking at is a unique approach to living with divine awareness.
Exactly. Whether you accept the specific prophetic timeline or not, the doctrine raises profound questions about how we live when we believe God is actively, continuously evaluating our spiritual progress.
And it's created this distinctive spiritual rhythm for millions of believers, this cycle of daily examination, confession, and renewal that mirrors what they believe is happening in heaven.
Right. The morning mercy, the evening reflection, the constant awareness of divine scrutiny. It's a comprehensive approach to spiritual life that emerged from trying to make sense of prophetic disappointment.
What's fascinating is how a doctrine born from crisis became a source of spiritual structure and meaning. The great disappointment led to what believers see as the great understanding.
And that transformation, from disappointment to doctrine, shows how religious communities can find meaning and purpose even when their initial expectations aren't met. They didn't abandon their faith, they reinterpreted their experience.
So the next time you hear about Seventh-day Adventists, remember this isn't just about Saturday worship or dietary laws. At the heart of their faith is this belief that divine judgment is happening right now, hour by hour, examining the lives of believers with perfect justice and mercy.
And whether you find that comforting or concerning probably says as much about your own spiritual journey as it does about the doctrine itself. It's a reminder that how we understand divine justice shapes how we live our daily lives.
Thanks for joining us on Copilot Podcasts. The investigative judgment may have started as an explanation for why Christ didn't return in 1844, but it became something much more profound, a way of living as if every moment matters to eternity. And in that sense, maybe we're all under investigation.